Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and as far as Bewley's concerned, I'm just a Robbin Hood. Yeah, all right. Yeah, the way I'm stealing from his genealogy and just giving right on to Mud City. All right, so have fun with this one, guys. Okay, so before I get started, I just wanted to mention this, which I think is really amazing, right? It's the picture that they have, the first picture off to the right, which is I didn't notice in my laser focus of recording the episode yesterday, that the picture that they have right at the top is of the Royal Forest of Exmoor in Devon. Right? Are you kidding me? You know, tying Poe to the Royal Forests and the Poe name to Devon, and there being a Royal Forest in Devon. And I think it's also interesting that, of course, when I don't know about you, but just hearing the word Royal Forest, you just think trees, you know, like Sherwood Forest or some of these other major forests, lots of woods, right? But the very first image they provide of a Royal Forest is barren. It's the Exmoor. It's a more, no more. So it's very interesting also the way that just the phrase "moor" and the Moors, and this is all going in a very Moorish direction now. Right? But I mean, just unbelievable. You know, unless you kind of had any idea what to look for, this would mean nothing. But it all makes sense in the Mud City Paradigm Puzzle Tree. I don't know. All right, so now, okay, so let's get to these dominoes here and moving this thing along. And so, as I'm saying, just really amazing that, you know, if there is this element of the mythology and of the deliberate creation of a false historical paradigm, and one that is controlled through arts, literature, science, you know, among other things, you know, religion and so forth, you know, there are branches to these things. And so the branch that we're looking at here is, you know, the control through arts and literature. So I don't know, you know, Royal Forest, this picture, barren landscape, it's almost like they're trying to say there's nothing to see here. But I'm thinking a whole lot differently. I'm thinking there's plenty to see here, right? Especially now, you know, sort of thinking about the idea that, you know, these forests could be deeply connected to the mythology, the bloodlines, and bringing these bloodlines back to what would be, for all intents and purposes, like supernatural creatures, right? I mean, that's the idea. And so if you need to hide that in some way, and so you're the king and you appoint your keepers of the forests to make sure that, you know, that secret is protected, right? But of course, as history would like us to believe, you know, they kept all these solid records, right? And, you know, things were written down, and Bewley uses, you know, court documents and wills and things like this, you know, church registries, you know, so they have a record of things that they can present for generations down the line, you know, because it's a long con and they know they're going to have time to adjust the story as they need to in the coming, you know, century or two, right? You know, at this point here, which we're talking 1591, right? Just, you know, Queen Elizabeth. You wanted to kind of sweep that stuff under the rug and lose it. You know? There was no better place to lose it than to the underkeeper, right? You kind of just erase the idea that the underkeeper, you know, could have been there the whole time, you know, and as part of this story. And again, there would have been other families in charge of other royal forests and so forth, right? I mean, you know, but it moves, the pyramid always moves up, right? You know, so, but it's just interesting that Edgar Allan Poe's family is one, right? And very interesting the role that Sherwood Forest plays in the creation of romantic literature, right? And by extension, like the fantasy genres and so forth. I mean, these great lyrical poems that they were, right? Right, and this becomes increasingly interesting because the Byron family, this Sir John Byron, keeper of Sherwood Forest in 1591, is the father of the first Lord Byron, right? And the sixth Lord Byron is, of course, the Lord Byron, George Gordon Byron, you know, one of the most, if not the most influential of the romantic writers, right? With his romantic poetry and so forth, right? And of course, wouldn't you know it? You know, he just happened to be a fellow of the Royal Society. Of course he did, right? And now the fact that Edgar Allan Poe, extremely influential figure in this romantic literature movement, right? That spawns the mystery genre, and, really propels fantasy and science fiction as well, among others, George Gordon Byron here, maybe the most influential, one of the real progenitors of the Romantic movement, fellow of the Royal Society, because of course he was, right? And there's a lot more that ties Poe and this Lord Byron together. There's more coincidences and there's more strangeness involving these two to come, not the least of which is that they could have possibly met each other when Edgar Allan Poe was a little boy, right? And, so when I was looking at Lord Byron, and as I was saying, there's going to be more on him and this Poe story later. When I was doing my due diligence on him, he has a few children, but only one legitimate daughter by a wife, right? The rest are out of wedlock, right? And it's this daughter, his only legitimate child, Ada Lovelace. She's also the Right Honorable, right? That's how royal this bloodline is, this Byron bloodline. She is a mathematician and writer, but more importantly, she may be the very first computer programmer, right? Right? She is believed by some to be the first to recognize that the machine had applications beyond pure calculation, and to have published the first algorithm intended to be carried out by such a machine. All right, and she is known to have worked with, right, her educational and social exploits brought her into contact with scientists such as these guys, right, and Charles Wheatstone. Now, Charles Wheatstone plays a big part in Master of Reality. I just hadn't got to him yet, but he did come up even earlier than that in the Bam Googled episode as the inventor of the Wheatstone Bridge, right, which was a very early circuit, which the fraternity that Larry Page, founder of Google, co-founder of Google, uses as their logo, right? Right, which is also similar to the F# programming language logo, right? Right, which is again one of the very first circuits, and so connecting like the Master Reality, Bam Googled back to like the church machine videos that I did with the F#, how sharp is your F or whatever I named that one. Just incredible that Lord Byron's daughter would branch out and reach those aspects of the Mud City paradigm puzzle tree. I mean, it's just, again, that's the way these connections have been popping, right? And right, and so this Byron family, deeply connected to Sherwood Forest, which again in this paradigm is a very magical place, right? Or would be, right? Especially if it connects to Baltimore with these families, right? And the stuff coming out of Baltimore, right? And so he's awarded his plantation here, his manor of Papplewick, by letters patent of King Henry VIII in 1540. So he's getting this huge tract of land here, right adjacent to Sherwood Forest, in 1540. And so now connecting these families and these dates, I don't think it's a coincidence that in 1540 is when we have this Thomas Poa on the Latin land grant on Templar land, right outside of Irvine in Scotland, right? I don't think that's a coincidence there, just as I don't think it's a coincidence that Bewley does not mention the Scottish Poes, Poas, Powells. Again, he's very insistent on the name variations and it's all the same family, right? But why he doesn't talk about these other elements is just, it can't be simple oversight, especially seeing who this book was written for and what purpose it may have served, right? It's just crazy to me. So again, I don't know, Poe getting Templar land in Scotland, and the immortal David Poe, the Scottish Covenanter, coming out of there, right? Also having a Poe as underkeeper of Sherwood Forest. These things can't be a coincidence. So when I'm making the connections to the dates and the years and the people, and right, so he gets this. So John Byron, right? He's granted Papplewick, right? And on Papplewick is where Anthony Poe as a yeoman, right? And it's his sons that move out into the plantation of Ulster. And now this is where it gets to, like, it's not so much important like the individual members of Poe's family here. But in stealing a page from Bewley's book, I really want to try to paint a broader picture of this Poe family here, because it really becomes more important like their connections and stuff, and how wealthy they were really, right? Because again, a lot of it's kind of swept under the rug. So I wanted to take a quick look into Papawick, right? Because this is where the Poes live, and he's a tenant farmer, right? But of really good standing. The Poes are a wealthy family, and I'm going to demonstrate how wealthy they could have been. And so Papawick adjoins Sherwood Forest, right? And here's the wiki on them, right? And it's a village in civil parish today, and at one point it was the southern gateway to Sherwood Forest. So the southern entry point of Sherwood Forest was owned by the Byron family. All right, but the interesting thing is they do not mention the Byron family one time here. But what it does say is that there's a local legend that indicates the body of Allen a Dale, one of Robin Hood's men, was buried in Papawick. And now it wasn't my intention at all while starting this to look at like that deeply into Robin Hood, right? I didn't think it was going to go that way. It was just kind of a fun connection to be made there. But now discovering the Byron connection and Poe and romantic poetry and what those Robin Hood tales really were, a very early, a sort of very sort of early form of fantastic tale to pacify and entertain the minds of the people, right? That's their purpose, right? And seeing that it's Allen and the way the name Allen is, considering for like Edgar Allan Poe, when you learn about him just briefly, he gets the Allen from his foster parents, but again, they don't really go into the history of who John Allen was and what his name could mean, and right, and to see the name Allen bounce all around the name Poe without actually being attached to somebody named Poe, right? I mean, we have Alan a Dale, the character Alan a Dale here, and Robin Hood, who may or may not be a real person buried in Papawick, right? To killed Allen in Ireland and the Roe Allen moors in Scotland. So it's so I'm really kind of amazed at the way the name Allen is really so affixed to the poem. And so like connecting that and the idea of what Robin Hood is, all right, let's take just a quick look at Robin Hood, right? And again, so just really quickly, the first reference of the rhymes of Robin Hood appear in like the 1370s, right? And the story works its way up, through the Renaissance era. But it says, however, the earliest surviving copies of the narrative ballads that tell his story date to the second half of the 15th century and the first decade of the 16th century. And so who was the keeper of Sherwood Forest and the underkeeper of Sherwood Forest in the second half of the 16th century and the first decade of the 16th century? Why, it was John Byron and perhaps Richard Poe. Right? And what do they say? Who was Robin Hood? Right? In the earliest ballads, it's quite clear that Robin Hood's social status. He's a yeoman, right? An excellent archer, right? And so there's lots of tales of Robin Hood. I'm not going to go over the individual stories, because I'm not familiar with them at all, but, it's just kind of more important what they represent, this sort of very early, fantastic literature kind of story, all right? And that they say that some of the earliest in existence are copies that survive from this point in time, which is when the Poes and the Byrons were in Sherwood Forest, right? And we're looking at, the control, at the use of popular literature and poetry, song, the arts, and things like this as manipulation techniques for the masses, right? And so just unbelievable that, I don't know, it doesn't seem so hard to maybe make a case that this Anthony Poe yeoman, right, father of five, that maybe the stories of Robin Hood really start with him, stories that he and the Byrons created. All right, so all that aside, it's Anthony Poe's children who go on to settle in Ireland through the plantation of Ulster and other areas, and they're very successful men in their own right, some serving in the parliamentary army and some becoming very successful farmers and so forth. And so one thing I just want to talk about briefly, because I don't know how much I'm going to get into all of, them individually, but how wealthy the family was and how well connected the family was. And so just to give you a demonstration, at some point in here, maybe I'll come across it, they talk about the wills of one of them, one of these Poes, and that they, that he leaves like an annuity of £1 to one of his like grandchildren and stuff, and some of the dollar figures that they leave behind, right? And I believe the will is some point in the mid 1660s, because this is what I have in my research window, and I'm sure there's no coincidence about this. All right, so I have the relative value of £1 in 1633. So it's not a coincidence. I just can't remember right now whose will I was looking at. That £1 was worth even from £168 to £54,690. All right, £1. All right, and some of the dollar figures that get thrown around, like, I don't know if it's a buyer and somebody or some other lord, we'll see, like, just gives one of the Poe relatives like £5,000. Right, 5,000 times 54,000. That's an astronomical sum of money. I mean, these were not poor people, the Poe family, right? They were not, don't be deceived, as I've been saying, that by the term yeoman, right? And what their possible influence could have been, because they didn't have the title of baron or lord of anything, right? Right, because they never achieved that anywhere that I've seen yet, There's never been a Baron Poe or a Lord Poe. And now again, this is where I want to start tying it in with the places and some of the people before I start talking a little bit about some of the individual Poes themselves, especially to Lenny. I got to talk about Lenny a little bit. All right, so now to just demonstrate, like William here, he settles in the County Tyrone, right? Or Tyrone, however I'm going to slip and call it from the rest of the way out here. And I think it's interesting, the root is Tyr, as we looked at in Winter, Winter, Chicken Dinner, right? The root of that and the importance that that could play, right? And so we have the County Tyrone here, right? And when I was doing my due diligence on it, okay, and so just right off the bat, its coat of arms, I love it's got the red hand. I don't know, left or right hand, however you want to make it. I think that's pretty cool, right? Right? So, but this is where it's located here. Right, and so here it is, and this was O'Neill land. That was the Gaelic clan that had possession of these lands before the plantation of Ulster, right? And so without getting all into the history of all of that, which will happen at some point eventually, but just, finding that tree, that dot that that connects it was looking at the notable people and who came from County Tyrone. All right, and so when I was, scrolling through, right, John Dunlap, publisher of the first American daily newspaper, right, and printer of the American Declaration of Independence, as we talked about in the Sussex Declaration, right? He made the broadsides. He made the copies that went out to the rest of the world, right, declaring America's independence, right? And in that episode, I talked about how there may have been source documents and what they could have been and everything like that, right? And so that's, again, just another amazing way that this branches out and connects back to the work that I've been doing and how the story has been coming to me, because, I cannot stress hard enough how I am not telling this story. This story is telling itself through me, and, connecting Dunlap now to the possible orchestration of the American Revolution out of Baltimore, right? And knowing the importance of what the newspaper is and its form and function in controlling the population, right? And connecting this story back into Baltimore. And what, one of the things that you need to make broadsides and newspapers and stuff like that is paper. And I don't have his name brought up now, but connecting it in another crazier way back to David Rittenhouse of the orrery fame. And I can't remember if in his episode I talked about where his family gets its money from. He was the first guy to have a paper manufacturer in the American colonies, and really late, not until like the late 1700s. So, some 150 years into the American plantation experiment, is the first real sort of paper factory. And one of the things that you need to put these papers in magazines, which is something that Edgar Allan Poe is really involved with, the early use of magazines as cultural brainwashing. So being able to tie him to County Tyrone and the Poe family to Tyrone, and like I said, somewhere in here it says that their family was like owner of half of Tyrone, right? And further on, Thomas, I think, settles in County I'm gonna butcher this. County Fermanagh. Fermanagh? So Thomas settles in County Fermanagh and was the progenitor of the Tipperary branch of the Poe family. Right? That's where I got progenitor from. Now, Tipperary is familiar and connects in because this is unbelievable. Because this is where Charles Carroll the barrister comes from, right? And the Carroll family that settles here in Maryland and pretty much ran the show, as far as I'm concerned, back in the day. Right? Where does it say? He was a descendant of the last Gaelic lords of Ale in Ireland, right? And Ale was a medieval petty kingdom in the southern part of the county Offaly and parts of North Tipperary, right? And so now we have the Poes on the same land that the Carrolls were the kings of, right? Absolutely unbelievable tying this story together, right? And the story gets even crazier because, they end up, where do the Poes end up? But in County Cavan. And where's County Cavan? Right? It's here. It's this chicken leg looking county, right? And again, I'm going to touch more into this. This is all about, like I said, making these connections and tying them all together so you get a good sense of how deeply rooted this thing is into Mud City. It's absolutely absurd. What just so happens to be right next to County Cavan? It's County Longford. And County Longford is here, right next door. And whose barony and lordship happens to come out of County Longford? Why, it's George Calvert, the first Baron Baltimore, Georgie boy. Right honorable, of course. Right? He gets his lordship. He is named, his peerage comes from the County Longford. And that's where Baltimore Manor is. It's no coincidence. Okay, and I think I'm going to end this one here now. Remember, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lie. All right, until the next one. Cheers, guys.